I'm Drew Goldfarb, joined by Taylor Smith. Today we are looking at Major League Baseball at the unofficial halfway point. This is the All-Star break. There are 5 teams currently holding playoff spots in the East, 5 teams holding in the American League, 5 teams holding in the National League. And there's obviously a lot still in contention. Only a few have been eliminated. One that we're looking at in the National League. The American League, though, Taylor, 5 teams basically out of it at this point. 10 games or more back of the wild card. Seattle, Toronto, Baltimore, Detroit, Kansas City. So we're ignoring all of them. But that still leaves 10 teams battling for those 5 playoff positions. The American League East is the one that currently has the best team in the league. That would be the New York Yankees. They're plus 150 to win the AL pennant as of right now. The Rays are currently holding or right in contention, they're holding a wild card spot. So let's look at this division first. Do you see this division kind of staying the same way as the rest of the season plays out? Boston's not in a playoff spot, and that's kind of surprising.
Yeah, I don't see either team catching the Yankees. I think, 6.5 game lead's not insurmountable, but the Yankees have gotten here basically 3/4 of the way with like half their roster on the DL or IL. So, as they get healthier, which they have been, I think they're just going to get stronger and stronger. Who knows about Luis Severino? I think that gives me a little pause as far as their long-term chances. But in the division, I think the Yankees are a pretty safe bet. Tampa Bay is the current leader in the wild card. I think a half game up on Cleveland. I feel like they've been overperforming a little bit, but at the same time, they're also, I think they have the best pitching among the non-division leaders right now. And I think you can make the argument their pitching's better than Minnesota's. So among wildcard teams in that division, I think the Rays are a pretty good bet. And I think Boston, I think they could easily get 3 teams in the playoffs, and I wouldn't be surprised at all. So right now, if I had to bet, I would say all 3 make it. The Yankees win the division, Tampa wins the wild card, and Boston plays Tampa in the wild card game.
I mean, that is pretty safe. By the way, Tampa's expected win-loss record, according to the run differential stuff, is actually 2 games better than their real record. Their expected record is 54-37. They're actually 52-39 right now. I agree with you. I think they've been over. They're a little bit playing out. They're outplaying what they should be at this point. But Boston's been. I mean, they had a terrible start to the year, but they're still a great team. They're a team that, should be at the very least in contention for that second wild card spot, trying to chase the Cleveland Indians down. It's amazing that you've got the worst team in the American League in Baltimore and the best team in the American League in the Yankees, because I agree with you. They're the clear-cut favorites to do what they've done this year with the injuries that they've had. There's a reason they're plus 150 to win the American League pennant, and they're just that good of a team. I do see Tampa Bay making the playoffs. I could see Boston challenging. I'm not positive because basically we've been going throughout the entire season, and it's like always, Boston's better than they're showing. And at some point, they've got to play better. They've got to actually be that team that they should be. And with every passing week where they remain third, a few games back of the wild card, currently 2 games back of Cleveland. Every passing week is, 6 games fewer that they have to make up that ground. And at some point, they've got to turn it around. I don't know that it's going to be like the end of July, that if they're still just hanging a few games back, if you just go, all right, you know what, Boston's done. But because it's hard to do that with a team like that. But this might be who the Red Sox are. It very well could be. I'm not willing to say that yet. I agree with you that they're still the team that is currently outside of a playoff spot in the AL that I think has the best chance of making the playoffs. But the clock is ticking on it. It's going to be just a few more weeks where I go just finally like, all right, done with you, Boston. Washing my hands, moving away from the Red Sox.
Yeah, I'd much rather take them to make the playoffs than I would to actually do anything once they're there, just because – if you look at their pitching, they have Sale, who's arguably, the best in the game. But then beyond that, Erod, super inconsistent. Rick Porcello has been terrible this season. David Price has been inconsistent ever since joining them. Who knows what's up with Nate Eovaldi? It seems like he and Joe Kelly kind of just, I don't know what they were doing in the playoffs, but they were completely unhittable. And, Eovaldi's been hurt and Joe Kelly's been horrible for the Dodgers. So pitching is what matters the most, I think, in the playoffs. So I think Boston has enough talent to make that second wild card spot, but yeah, I'm not seeing anything beyond that. It seems like last year was more anomalous than, the start of some kind of dynasty for them.
Let's move to the AL Central here. The Minnesota Twins leading that division. The Cleveland Indians still currently holding on to that second wild card spot ahead of Boston. Oakland, by the way, also closer to Cleveland than Boston is right now. So not just a two-team race, but we're going to get to the West in a minute. Minnesota seems pretty locked in. They're 5.5 games up on Cleveland. I think you and I would agree the Twins are a lock for the postseason at this point.
Yeah, it's mostly because I don't trust Cleveland at this point. They've been better lately. They've won 6 in a row heading into the break. They've closed the gap a little bit. I don't know. They lost so many talented key players during the offseason that they're not the team they were last year. Corey Kluber broke his arm a few months ago, however long it's been. If they do make it, I think it will still be on the shoulders of that starting rotation. They still have Trevor Bauer. Shane Bieber has been insanely good for them. Zach Plesac has shown a little bit. Mike Clevenger just came back. I think they can make a wild card spot. I think I would take them right behind Boston in terms of most likely teams to nab the second spot behind Tampa Bay, but the division's pretty clearly Minnesota's. Even though it's a 5.5 game gap, just on the balance of the whole season, they've looked far more imposing. I still don't love Minnesota's long-term prospects just because of that rotation, but the lineup's just stacked with power. Cleveland's lineup is pretty barren compared to where it's been the last few years. So that's the only other team I think has much of a chance. Chicago is not completely out of it. That's obviously a team to watch, next year, the year after that. I think they're 1 year early in terms of competing for the playoffs. So Minnesota or Cleveland, I think Minnesota is pretty clearly the pick.
I mean, that Twins offense is fantastic. 509 runs scored in the first half. They actually have the best runs per game offensively in at least the American League. I'm trying to do the quick math on the Braves. And yeah, they've actually played fewer games than the Braves. So yeah, they've tied with the Red Sox for the most runs scored ahead of the All-Star break. They've played fewer games than the Red Sox at this point by 2. They've played 1 fewer game than the Yankees, and they've scored 6 more runs. So that is the best offense in Major League Baseball to this point in the season. Yankees obviously have had some injury issues, so that offense will be better when fully healthy. But the Twins have been good. Their pitching's been basically the same as the Yankees when you're looking at just strictly from runs allowed, which is obviously if you're outscoring your opponent, you're winning. So that's a very simplified version of things without getting into the deep stats. But really good run differential. It's Minnesota's division. They're going to win that, and we'll see where the matchup goes, I think, in the playoffs, kind of determining it. They're the pick when we've been doing our weekly betting for the cycle show. They're my pick in the American League because I do like their value that they offer. They're a division leader. They have a great run differential. They're basically their record and their expected win-loss is basically the same. And I don't see them being upset by anything. I don't see Cleveland unseating them in the AL Central. So they're kind of my value play at plus 450 when the other 2 division leaders to win the AL pennant are the Yankees at plus 150 and Houston at plus 170. Plus 450 to get the other division leader that basically has the same record as those other 2 teams, for me, is value. But let's go over to the West because the Houston Astros, another comfortable lead. They actually have the biggest lead on the division of any team that is not the Dodgers right now in baseball. 7.5 games up on the Oakland Athletics. Fantastic team. This is a team that obviously we saw win the World Series somewhat recently, and they've kind of built from there. I know that you're looking forward to talking about the Astros. So they're plus 170 to win the AL pennant, just barely behind the Yankees. The West is theirs. Are they a team that do they really have that legitimate chance of beating the Yankees if the Yankees are healthy? How do you see that stacking up?
I think they do. But on the flip side, I do think they still need to add a starter at the deadline. Verlander and Cole, that's as good a 1-2 as you're going to find in the league. But I still think Wade Miley in Game 3 potentially is extremely scary if you're, betting on the Astros against a Yankees lineup that's almost entirely right-handed.
It's a shame there wasn't someone like a Dallas Keuchel, for instance, available for someone to sign, even
I know. It's a
month.
real shame.
Yeah.
It's too bad that, he got his $300 million deal last offseason. So what are you going to do? Yeah, if they're fully healthy, which they should be, Correa will come back after the break. Aledmus Diaz as well. The lineup is comparable to the Yankees. They don't necessarily have as much star power, but they're the two clear favorites in the American League. I don't really see any way around them. I like your Minnesota argument, though, just because that's the third division leader. Plus 450 is insane value. But yeah, the West is clearly theirs. I don't know what to make of Oakland or Texas. Texas has overperformed expectations pretty massively. I think people thought this team was going to be fourth or fifth place for sure. Now they've been better than the Angels, all season long. I think Texas will eventually peter out. I don't think they can be buyers at the deadline, considering they didn't expect to be here. I would imagine they will either stand pat or maybe sell off some pieces as they build forward, because the division's a lost cause. They're losing ground on the wild card race a little bit, 4-6 over the last 10. Oakland every year is that team that starts off slowly, and then, once the All-Star break comes around, you're like, oh, hey, there's Oakland 2 games back or whatever of the wild card. So,
that should actually be their team name. Oh, look, there's Oakland.
Yeah, they should just travel around from city to city and not play in Oakland. But I don't know what to make of them either. They're kind of like the Twins are better, no doubt, but they're similar in that I don't trust their starting pitching at all. Mike Fiers, I imagine, is their game one starter. If Frankie Montas, I don't know if he's eligible, but losing him for suspension is obviously a huge deal. I'd still rather take Boston or Cleveland among those secondary wildcard teams over Oakland, but I don't hate the value on taking the A's to maybe sneak into the postseason. But beyond that, the AL is just so top heavy. It's New York, it's Houston, Minnesota, maybe Boston, maybe Tampa Bay, and that's it for me.
Yeah, I agree on Oakland maybe sneaking in, because I'm looking at it when you're looking through the standings and everything. Obviously, I mean, Oakland is always that team that does have that surge. They're always that potential. They're always right there. Never really the pick to win the AL, but they're always a team that's kind of in there and makes things interesting down the stretch. The record against teams over 500 this year is 23-19. They are the only team that is not currently in a playoff spot that has a 500 or better record against winning teams this season. And that mark is better than Tampa and Cleveland, who both have losing records against teams over 500 this year. So they very well could surge. Minnesota, by the way, 19-18 against teams over 500. They've only got one other team in their division that's over 500. So a lot of those are going to be from outside of the AL Central. But it's the A's could surge. They're plus 1,800 to win the AL pennant. I agree with you, not taking that. If you're looking at a wager to make the playoffs, they're going to provide the best value of any team that is competing for the wild card as of right now. I, like you, rule out the Texas Rangers. 6 games over 500 is shocking. Plus 2,500 odds to win the AL pennant. No, thank you. The Angels are, basically a 500 team right now. I'm not picking them either. Oakland, I think, is the West's opportunity to have a second team make the playoffs. They could very well unseat Cleveland. It's them, Cleveland, and Boston. I mean, that's literally stating the obvious, because those are the 3 teams that are, other than the Rangers, that are actually competing for that wild card spot right now. But I might – at the end of July, if the standings are exactly what we're looking at now, I would prefer Oakland to Boston. Looking here at the All-Star break, I'm still not ready to rule out the Red Sox because they're the Red Sox. But if 3 weeks from now, if the standings are exactly what we're looking at now, where Boston's 2 games back, Oakland's about 2 games back, Cleveland's just kind of hanging on to the second spot, I'm picking the A's to take that second wild card spot. But as we're sitting here right now, I'm not quite ready to rule out Boston. Just kind of the way it is. So that's the American League, which is very thin, because even the teams that are not 10 games back of the wild card, the White Sox, the Angels, and to a lesser extent the Rangers, are relatively simple to kind of pushed to the side and say they're not really going to be competing. In the National League, the only team that is 10 games back of the wild card or further are the Miami Marlins, who are 13 games back, which would still put them closer to the wild card spot than Seattle, Detroit, Kansas City, Toronto, or Baltimore in the American League wild card race, which is insane. The San Francisco Giants are only 5.5 games back of the wild card. The Mets are 7 games back of the wild card. Let's start in the NL East, because this is a division that in March and April looked one way. By June was starting to look another. And you're now in a 3-team race because we're ruling out the Marlins. I'm going to rule out the Mets. I'm assuming you will as well.
Yes.
So we're down to Atlanta, which once they signed Keuchel, I think became a favorite. They're currently at plus 300 odds to win the NL pennant. The Nationals, who are in a playoff spot right now, and the Phillies, who are also in a playoff spot right now. Are you more surprised that Washington in a post-Bryce Harper world are sitting in a playoff spot and actually a half game up on the Philadelphia Phillies? Or, I mean, is that the biggest surprise, at least in the National League right now? Because I can't think of another one.
The thing about them is, they are so talented already. I'm not totally shocked they are where they are. Last season they massively underperformed, missed the playoffs completely, despite having maybe the second best roster in the National League behind LA. So I'm not surprised they've gotten better this season. The thing I'm surprised about is that they're better than Philly. And I think that's more an indictment on Philly than it is me being impressed with Washington. Washington at the top of the rotation, Scherzer, Strasburg, Corbin, that's pretty stout. The lineup still has several all-star caliber players, even without Bryce Harper in there. So I'm not surprised they're where they are. I'm more surprised Philly, even though they are in a playoff spot, is only 4 games over 500. That team was probably more active than anyone in the offseason. Bryce Harper, Gene Segura, Andrew McCutchen, who's gone, JT Realmuto, etc. They've just underperformed. Bryce Harper hasn't been as good as he should be once again, which seems to be kind of a theme with him over the last couple seasons. I expected Atlanta to kind of tumble in the standings a little bit before the season started. They've impressed me even without last season's ace, Mike Foltynewicz, being good at all. He's been hurt, and I think he was just demoted recently to the minors. So they're massively impressive. Austin Riley's been crushing for them. Ronald Acuna is doing his thing. Freddie Freeman, etc. That's a super competitive division, even with Atlanta kind of well ahead right now. I like Philly long-term, I think, more than Washington, but it's hard to kind of overstate their struggles or understate their struggles. So I don't know. It's hard to know what to make of those teams beyond Atlanta. Do you have a real feel for either of them?
I don't. It's just the more I've thought about the Phillies, the more they remind me of the Washington Nationals in previous years. Yeah. They're kind of the team that you look at and you go, oh, this team should be great. Like, they should be the ones who can compete with LA, and, they should be in contention for a title or at least a pennant. And they're just not quite that good. All of the pieces are there. They're just like, I don't know what it is. It's they're just a strange team. I mean, the Braves for me they're going to win the division. They're probably going to be the team that plays the Dodgers in the NLCS. I think that the Braves, I mean, for me, again, going back to the Betting for the Cycle show, which you should watch every single week here on the Odds On Favorites YouTube channel. But they're kind of my value play. The Dodgers are a plus 100. The Braves are, I think, the only team that really stands a chance of unseating them. I think you made a really good point on the Nationals, though, and that's that despite losing Bryce Harper, they still have a really good roster because they had a very good team a year ago on paper that did not translate. So it shouldn't be overly shocking to see the Nationals competitive. I think to see the Nationals where they are, currently in second place in the NL East, is where I'm shocked by them. the Braves, for me, they were surging. They were playing really well. And then they signed Dallas Keuchel. And, he, for me, makes the difference for them. I'm kind of like locking in the Dodgers and the Braves into the NLCS at this point. Because for me, those are two obvious plays. But whether Washington, Philadelphia, I don't know which would be more likely to lose their wild card spot at this point. Because I can make an argument for both of them, where the Phillies should be the better team, but the Nationals should have been the better team a year ago, and the Phillies are basically playing like last year's Nationals.
It's super I can't get a read on it at all. Like, it's
bonkers.
Looking at Phillies rotation, it's pretty unimpressive once you get past Aaron Nola. Jake Arrieta's been horrible. That is not a good signing for them. You're looking at Jared Eichhoff and Cole Irvin and guys like that. And if you compare the rotations, at least, it's not even close between Washington and Philly. So in terms of talent, I guess like Washington, I don't know. Like, they could easily both make the playoffs, or they could easily both just flame out in the second half, and it wouldn't be that shocking, especially considering how, close the Central is. Yeah. I don't think there's a team in the West beyond LA that's going to make the playoffs this season. Maybe Colorado, but Colorado, as we speak, is in fourth in their own division, so it's really hard to make that case.
I think that when you're looking at the West, because I was going to bring them up in a bit, San Diego's been surprisingly impressive, especially for a 500 team. It's mostly their offense. I mean, they're only 2 games back of a wild card spot right now. They're sitting at 500, 45-45. Their expected win-loss record based on the run differential is actually below 500 because they've given up quite a few runs. Not nearly as many as the Rockies, but they also haven't scored nearly as many as the Rockies. But Hunter Renfroe has been freaking ridiculous this year with the home run count. I don't think there have been a lot of people on base ahead of him hitting those dingers. So, but there are only 3 teams in the National League that have a winning record against teams at or above 500. The Braves are 24-23. The Dodgers, obviously, 30-21. And the Padres are 26-19 against teams at or above 500. That is mind-blowing for a team that is 500, which means they have a losing record against losing teams.
Which has to be maddening if you're Andy Green or whoever in charge of that team.
Or anybody watching games or fans. I mean, but it also, for me, shows the most promise and potential, because if you can get a winning record against teams with winning records, you should, at the very least, be in consideration. They're close to a wild card spot. The Rockies are 3-7 in their last 10 heading into the All-Star break. The Padres rather are 5-5. The Diamondbacks are 6-4. Technically a half game closer to the wild card than the Padres are, but the West is LA's division. The National League might be the Dodgers. It's probably the Dodgers' to lose. The Dodgers to lose. Yeah. The Dodgers is to lose. But I do think Atlanta provides the best challenge for that. I think the Padres at plus 4,000 odds to win the NL. I'm not doing that, but it would give them pretty deep odds to make the playoffs if you can find that. Basically the same as the Diamondbacks to win the NL, and a little bit better, they're at plus 4,000 to win the NL. The Rockies are plus 3,300 to win the NL. If you can convert that to making the playoffs, I would rather take the Padres, given their performance against winning teams, than the Rockies, hoping they would stop playing down to their opposition, as they appear to have been, unless they're just playing up to their opposition. That's the other, obviously the other side.
They're also under 500 at home and over on the road. So it's like, if they had just performed up to caliber at home while beating the teams they should beat, they could be, I don't know if they'd be as good as the Dodgers at all, but they would at least be in much better position for a wild card spot. Not that they're in a bad place where they are, but there's just such a weird team. They're also 10th in the majors in home runs, despite playing most of their games in a park that's not considered to be hitter friendly, home run friendly. So,
but they also don't score that many runs.
No,
they're not even like in the top. Let's see, 4 ahead of them, 5, 6,
They're
7.
20th in runs
9,
in the
10.
major leagues.
They're 11th in the National League
Yeah.
in runs scored, and they're 10th in the majors in home runs hit.
It just shows how home run dependent they are, which I guess is true for a lot of teams nowadays. But
But
if
you
you
gotta have
give
someone
up,
get on base. Like that was what I was saying with you might have access to your keyboard in front of you. If you pull up Hunter Renfroe's numbers, because I think he's in the mid-20s in home runs hit, but it wouldn't shock me if he was under 50 RBI on the year.
49.
49.
Yep.
And how many home runs?
27.
27 home runs, 49 RBI. That means that more times than not, it's a solo home run.
Yeah.
Basically, it's averaging about a run and a third per home run hit.
Yeah, they're 21st and on base as a team.
They're what?
21st and on base as a team. So there you go.
So here, Padres, I'm going to coach you a little bit. Get runners on base, and then let Hunter Renfroe come up or Manny Machado, and let them drive you in. Not everyone has to hit a dinger on every at bat, but just try to get on base a little bit. But see, that's the thing for me. It's like the Padres have that potential there. It's if they can literally just reach base a little bit ahead of their home run hitters. 27 home runs and 49 RBI. I don't know. I mean, he's on pace for, at that point, he's on pace for about 40. I don't know what the fewest RBI recorded in a season with hitting 35 or more home runs would be, but he's got to be at least, in contention for that record that I'm inventing. We'll get Buster Olney on that one, or to kind of look up some of those.
Yeah, sure they got it all.
Exactly. Let's go to the NL Central to kind of wrap it up a little bit, because this division is insane. We're at the All-Star break, and the last place Reds are 4.5 games back of the first place Cubs. There's literally no team eliminated when you're just looking at it from a pure number perspective. There is no team that is over 500 against teams over 500. The Cubs are 24-24. The Cubs have a half-game lead on Milwaukee. The Cardinals are 2 games back. Pirates 2.5 back. The Reds 4.5 back. It's kind of anyone's division, and usually when I'm looking at the NL Central, if it's anyone's division, I pick St. Louis, because they're usually the team that does that. When it's like, there's nobody eliminated from this. It's like, all right, well, then the Cardinals are going to win.
Right.
Or maybe it's just because as a Mets fan, I still am looking back to 2006 when the Cardinals snuck into the playoffs as the division winner in the awful NL Central. And I just can't get over that. But when you're looking at this at this division, by the way, the records in the last 10 entering the All-Star break also stupidly close. Cubs are 4-6, Brewers 4-6, Cardinals 4-6, Pirates 6-4, Reds 5-5. No one stands out. So who stands out to you in the NL Central?
Man, this is like the Washington Philadelphia thing, where it's like all these teams are kind of the same, even though Chicago and Milwaukee and St. Louis should be pretty clearly ahead of Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. They're just not. All three, I think, have underperformed. The Reds actually have the second best run differential in the division by a ton. The Reds are at plus 27. The Cardinals are third at plus 2. The Brewers are at minus 17, and Pittsburgh is way down at minus 36. So the Reds somehow plus 27, but also 5 under. I mean, Cincinnati and Pittsburgh looked interesting before the season. Cincinnati made some moves during the winter. I don't think, even Pittsburgh is only 2.5 games out of the division. I'm having a hard time seeing anyone but the Cubs at this point. Milwaukee's been disappointing. People thought they would take a step forward. They have not, even though Yelich is once again just having an unbelievable season. Their offense is fine, I think. They've had some down seasons out of guys like Jesus Aguilar and Lorenzo Cain. They haven't been nearly as good as they were a season ago. The pitching, last year, they made the NLCS. They were 1 game from the World Series, despite having like Wade Miley and Yuli Chacin as their 1-2 in the rotation. So they're kind of built in such a way that they're overly dependent on their bullpen, and I'm not sure that's a sustainable method. But if you look at the Cubs, they have big names in the rotation, but those big names aren't really worth the name recognition anymore. Yu Darvish, Jose Quintana, even John Lester. Kyle Hendricks has not been quite as good as he was maybe last year or the year before. They added Kimbrel. I don't know if Kimbrel's the guy that's going to be closing out games in the playoffs. He hasn't looked, pristine in 2 years now, probably. So, what's interesting is the Texas Rangers would actually be leading this division if they were in the division. They would have the third best record in the National League. And here we are writing them off in the American League. But this is a crapshoot. I think you can bet on any of St. Louis, Chicago, or Milwaukee and feel okay. I think the biggest disappointment of this group is probably St. Louis, though. I thought they would take a step forward with Goldie coming in. For some reason, that offense just isn't good, even though it's laden with talent, and I can't figure it out. Like, Goldschmidt has been okay. Ozuna was great. He's hurt now. Paul DeJong got off to a hot start. He's fizzled. Matt Carpenter's not been very good. I don't know what to make of that team either.
Yeah, I think your analogy of saying that basically this entire division is made up of nothing but Washingtons and Philadelphias is spot on, because there's an argument to be made for at least 4 of the teams. I can't really think of one for Pittsburgh, other than they've got an amazing ballpark. That's really the best argument I can make, is like, oh, it'd be great to see an extra couple games at PNC because of that view. But anyway, Cincinnati is ridiculous because their expected win-loss is 47-40 because of that run differential that you brought up, which would put them right now in first place in the division. Although the Cubs' expected win-loss is 50-40, so they've been a little bit sub. But the Reds, though, don't score runs. 368 runs scored is worse than every other team in the National League except for the Marlins.
Wow.
It's 1 run fewer than the Giants have scored. The difference, though, is they've only given up 341 runs, which is the best in the National League, at least. Tampa is the only one ahead of them in the American League. So they have the second fewest runs allowed in Major League Baseball.
And they play in that tiny ballpark at home. Like, that's a home-friendly park, and somehow they don't score runs and they don't give up runs. It must play really low-scoring, boring games. Or exciting games.
Hey, I enjoy a little National League Baseball,
Yeah.
But,
I mean, if you look at the rotation, it's talented. Luis Castillo looks like an ace. Sonny Gray, my boy Sonny Gray, he was wronged in New York, and I think he's found a home here. Tyler Malley's been good. Tanner Roark is Tanner Roark. He's what he does. It's what he does. Desclafani is a fine pitcher. But the offense has talent. They should score runs. Joey Votto's been underperforming. Puig, I never know what to make of Puig anymore. Jesse Winker, inconsistent playing time. Derek Dietrich's kind of slowed down a little bit. Scooter Gennett just came back. Maybe that'll help him. If you want to take a flyer, I get it. They're only 4.5 back, and the numbers say they should be better than they are. So I guess if you want a full-on punt value in the National League, Cincinnati, there's a pretty strong case for that. I'm seeing plus 4,500 to win the NL. Not doing that. But I would take them before I took the Padres, I think, just based on the underlying numbers and division gap.
It depends on if you're looking at offense or defense. Realistically, if the Padres offense could be played with the Reds defense, you've got yourself the NL Central leader. So, I mean, I don't mind them again as like a make the playoffs kind of bet, just as like an outside shot.
Right.
I'd have to lead towards the Cubs at this point. I know that you and I both picked the Brewers in betting for the cycle to be leading the division entering the All-Star break. That was based on their schedule. And then the Pirates had a good series against the Brewers leading into the All-Star break. So that's how the Cubs have a half-game lead. But I think the Cubs are the safest bet to make the playoffs out of the NL Central. I don't think to make it. I don't think that even if the Reds were to come back to I don't think that even if the Reds' second half was their expected win-loss from the first half, that they would be a wild card team just because there's so many other teams I'd pick ahead of them. But it's hard to pick it. I kind of agree with you. If you like defense and you think that will make could have a team make the playoffs in the NL, the Reds are probably the best value play to win a wild card spot. If you like offense, it's probably the Padres. Then if you're kind of just going with the you'd pick Colorado as kind of like that other team. If you're like looking for a little bit of balance, they're not like spectacular on offense, not spectacular pitching, although their offense is pretty spectacular. It's just their pitching is that, their run differential is nothing.
It's just their home games. Their offense looks great at home and then horrible on the road, as you would expect.
Yeah. 5 games over 500 for the Rockies when they're playing at Coors Field, and 6 games under when they're playing it anywhere else outside of Denver. So, the NL Central, that wild card is insanely up for grabs in the National League. Makes for a lot of fun. Makes for some decent opportunities if you want to take a flyer on someone to qualify for the postseason. But wrapping things up, as we're sitting here, and I know we do our World Series picks every week with Betting for the Cycle, where we're able to keep our odds from week to week. If we're looking at it literally on today and we're trying to pick those teams, the Dodgers at plus 100 and the Yankees at plus 150 are clear-cut favorites to win their respective pennants. But is there value in playing both of them? And if you are trying to make sure that you don't basically end up at a wash financially, if, for instance, if you were to see Houston and LA make the World Series, is there a pick you'd rather make as of right now, as of the All-Star break, to win the AL and NL pennants?
I mean, the thing about baseball is it's so random that over a short series, you never know what can happen. I don't see a way around LA and the NL, to be honest. I think Atlanta's the best chance, but they, based on their expected record, have slightly overperformed to this point. And once you just get into the series with LA, they just have so much depth in every area. We've seen it in the playoffs the last 2 years. I think I don't know if they steamroll their way through the NL, but assuming they're healthy, I don't see them as beatable. The National League on the whole is a little bit weaker, I think. The AL is stronger at the top, which I think makes the Yankees a scarier pick. I would be willing to take Houston at longer odds. That's really it, though. Like, the NL has more teams that are in the mix for the playoffs, but I think the AL has more teams in the mix to actually make or win the World Series. Tampa Bay, if you want to value, long shot, that might be where I go. I've kind of talked myself into them with like Blake Snell, Charlie Morton, Brendan McKay at the top of the rotation. That's pretty stout. Bullpen speaks for itself. So I don't think I would take the Yankees at plus 150. I'd rather take Houston at slightly longer odds. But in the NL, I think I would take LA still, even though plus 100 is pretty bad value.
I agree with you on Houston. And there's going to be one thing that's going to be really interesting when it comes to the American League playoffs, and that is the seeding. Because it is not unfathomable that we could end up with a first-round matchup of the Yankees and the Astros.
That would be terrible.
It would be terrible for those two teams. It would be great for Minnesota because the Twins play in the weakest division of the three. They don't get to beat up on Toronto and Baltimore, but they do get to beat up on Kansas City and Detroit. So it's actually even better when you're looking at win-loss records. But if Minnesota ends up with that best record and you get a Yankees-Astros series in the first round instead of in the ALCS, that could be really troublesome for everyone.
Especially since it's a 5-gamer.
Right. Yeah, you're looking – I mean – It's so hard because right now when you're going, to pick the AL pennant, I agree with you. It's like, yeah, Houston has a little bit of extra value. So I would consider them over the Yankees just because of that reason. But for me, the Yankees are still the obvious play because they're assuming that they are healthy entering the playoffs. I don't think that there's a better roster in the American League. They've shown the ability to win even without that full roster intact. They have a really good record against winning teams, though Houston is a better one. But what scares me about the American League is that first-round matchup, if it ends up being Houston versus New York, all bets are off on it because Minnesota then has a much easier path to the LCS, and whichever of Houston and New York gets out of that first round is going to have to then play Minnesota in the second round and be – in theory, could be exhausted from that. So I don't know. I really don't know. I would play the Yankees simply because if they're healthy, I think they have the better chance at winning the American League or having the top seed in the American League and playing a wild card team instead of having to play Houston potentially. I think there's more potential for the Yankees to finish in first in the AL record-wise than there is for Houston. And just because if they're healthy, they're going to be that team. So I'd play the Yankees over the Astros. The National League, I'm either not wagering on it because 1-1 on the Dodgers is zero value for me, or I'm taking the Braves on a flyer because I agree with you that I don't think there's any team that's going to unseat the Dodgers, but if someone does, it's going to be Atlanta. And for me, it's not worth a risk to get my money back, times 2, to take the Dodgers at plus 100. For me, it's a complete waste when you're talking about, having to play a team in a best of 5 series, whomever that might be. Because if you end up with the Phillies in the first round in a best of 5, or Washington,
yeah,
you could end up, you never know in that kind of a series. And then you'd have to play the Braves in the NLCS and theoretically, to get plus 100 odds, there's zero value to that. So I'm either betting Atlanta or I'm not betting on the NL simply because the Dodgers, who I think are the better team, there's no value in them. And in the AL, I'm probably taking the Yankees, or I'm going to do what I've been doing in betting for the cycle, which is I'm taking the Twins and hoping that they have the best record in the American League, because if they do, they're playing a wild card team, and then they're playing one of New York or Houston in the LCS, and it would be a team that would have had to go through the other one. So that's kind of where I'm at, where I'm either looking for value and hoping that one of Minnesota and Atlanta gets through, and then I still get more than my money back, or I'm not betting on the National League and I'm picking the Yankees. That's kind of what my play would be. But let us know who your play would be in the comments below. We want to know who you think would win the American League or win the National League as we're sitting here at the All-Star break. And if you have a value play, is there a team that you think might wind up qualifying for a wild card? Do you like San Diego? Do you like Cincinnati? Are you a Pittsburgh Pirates fan and offended by everything I said, except for the fact that PNC Park is gorgeous behind home plate view, because best view in baseball, in my opinion? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Odds On Favorites YouTube channel. I'm Drew Goldfarb. He's Taylor Smith. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.